Good day, my fellow Americans and good people of the world. Today I'd like to address you as a continuation from the video that I created earlier in regards to creating a offering of a potential or prospective proposition to Donald Trump to create an exit strategy to leave Iran and to save face and to somehow redeem the time and turn this negative outcome consequence into a diverging path that leads towards what could potentially lead us to a more imperishable world peace. Essentially, doggerel sum up from the last video that I created before I was interrupted and had to step away, is if Donald Trump submits willingly to the rule of law, he could potentially create a reunification with our allies, especially with NATO, in offering a willing submission to reconform and realign back with the law, and then and our mutual relationships of mutual benefits, interests, securities, and respects, and then realign back in with the UN and to stay in conform with our alliance with the UN and adhere to the UN Charter, and then realign and reconform his administration to be abiding by and dutifully supporting, upholding, defending, and protecting the Constitution, submitting to a war times resolution through Congress and supporting their decision to determine that it is not in America's best interest to be in war with Iran, and we need to create an appropriate exit strategy and also solve for the new complicated scenario that Americans are living in terms of heightened fear and heightened threat risks and the increase in our cost of living, and then Trump submit to that willingly and allow for Congress to reassert itself and realign itself with its authority to be the one that determines whether or not America goes to war or not, and for Trump to willingly submit to that. I mean, if you look, political strategy, coming with the midterms, the impacts of this war is going to be felt for the rest of the year, definitely. It would be intelligent for him to show to the American people that he will respect Congress and Congress's role in our, co-equal branch system as one of the capacities to put a check on the executive power so it doesn't get, turned into a unitary power that works on its own, which basically turns our democracy into an autocracy. And it would signal to the American people, even people like in his MAGA-based cohort, that voting still matters. And if you vote for people in Congress that are aligned with, the MAGA plan or whatever, the MAGA people are going to, help Trump to accomplish his best ideas to help improve America, but keep him in check from making the worst ideas, going off of his tendencies of not always consulting other people when he makes decisions. I mean, I refuse to listen to, mostly because I lack any respect for Tulsi Gabbard, to listen to her speaking before Congress today in her hearing, but I did hear some commentary in regards to what she was saying. Essentially, doggerel sum up, which is exactly what she responded to after the exit of her number 2 guy, that even though it's her job to assess and to establish a, working framework of, the big picture of where our nation stands in terms of, this national security risks. That, her role in that doesn't really matter because ultimately, as she said, deferring always to Trump to ultimately decide whether or not there's actually a national security risk, which to me is abdicating her responsibilities to uphold the Constitution, abdicating her responsibilities of the role of her position, abdicating her responsibility as an American citizen to work in the best interest of keeping America safe in a place worth defending at the same time. And also for the fact that the reason why a president has a cabinet with all of these directors and in their own various, positions and roles is that they have to be the ones that are formulating the intelligence, kind of like an extension of the president. Because the president can't be everywhere all at once, fully immersed in considering and deeply going into all of these different areas. The president needs to have their cabinet to facilitate all of those inner workings and then be able to bring it on back home in a doggerel sum up. President, this is what's going on. And to be able to field questions with the president, speak it out, talk it out with the president, and to help to make sure the president truly understands. Your job is to take all of the information and bring it on home with a doggerel sum up. And make sure that the president is operating off of that intelligence that you're bringing to them. And that while, yes, the ultimate decision maker is going to be the president themselves, if the president is operating in such a way that the president says they don't understand what's going on, they have no idea what's going on, they didn't understand, the implications of things, that ultimately means that, whoever is in that role of the cabinet that's supposed to bring forth that information failed in their job to make sure that the president was truly informed. And so Donald Trump is not a military strategist. He's never in his entire life cared about military or strategy. The closest thing is negotiating, but you see, his entire life has proven himself to be a negotiator by only the terms of having the upper hand to be able to exploit people's, weaknesses, or to bully them, or to almost extort them, these sorts of things. He's an intimidator. He is not a negotiator. There's a very big fundamental difference in that, and thus very big differences in terms of the outcomes. You just look how he's going towards, Iran, what he did with Venezuela, what he's threatening to do with Cuba, what he's, threatened to do with Greenland, what he threatened to do with Canada. I mean, everything he's done, has always been threats and using whatever power he has leverage-wise to get other people to submit to his will. And even when it goes against those people's best interest, because, they are making decisions other nations or allies nations are making decisions based off of, why they're not coming to Trump's call to go and open up the Strait of Hormuz. He's like, we need everybody, all hands on deck to be able to fix this or whatever, even though he contradicts himself in the same breath of saying, we don't need anybody, we got this, we can do this, we're the most powerful nation in the world. He knows that's not true. I mean, we are powerful, but we can't do this alone because, as a nation that's supposed to be and used to be and really is failing in its role to be a leader of the free world, is supposed to work with our allies, because our strength comes from our unity with one another, our resolve, our ways that we come together. And he's pushing everybody away, and he's holding people back, and he's holding them at ransom, and he's threatening them, and he's bullying them, intimidating, these sorts of things. And so he goes into this war without consulting the American people, any of our allies, without insulting his intelligence, directors, not consulting, his intelligence directors, not consulting the the American people, not consulting anybody, but yes, he is insulting everybody's intelligence by saying, like, he's trying to pass it off as if, he had some, brilliant strategic plan, and he's going all in, and he's, going to take out this thing that nobody else has ever been able to do so he can claim credit for it or something. And so what our allies are hearing is that this was an ego move, and it was impulsive. And as he said, when he feels it in his bones, he'll know it's done, because this was instinctual. But Trump's instincts are not conducive to what's in the best interest of all parties involved. It's not based off of truth. It's not based off of building goodwill. It's not based off of, establishing outcomes that are in the best interest of all parties involved. He's very self-centered. And so he's thinking of himself, his interests, his alignments, these sorts of things. And so when, he tries to call on our allies to come step up and be there for America, it's like, but you started this mess. You created this scenario, and now you want us to legitimize your illegitimate war by us coming to your aid because you didn't think this through enough, and now there's consequences that you can't handle on your own. And, you expect us, because we're beholden to you, that we need to come. That's a disrespect of the whole idea of alliance. Trump is letting them know clearly, I'm here to use you however I see fit. I will threaten you when it benefits me. I will demand you to come to my aid whenever it benefits me. I will belittle you and attack you when it benefits me. I'll threaten to invade you if it benefits me. But he doesn't think about the other side of it. I mean, Macron was saying, as things are now, man, we can't touch that with a 10-foot pole, essentially. And Trump's like, he's on the way out anyway. Like, he just wants to replace, people who are trying to work in the best interest of their national interest and on the best interest of their people and their populations. And Trump sees it as a personal attack on him, and because it makes him look bad as a president, as a failure president, but he doesn't realize he's doing that all on his own. Everybody else is just standing off in awe, like watching him burn America to the ground, and everybody's like, oh my God, like, how is it that this amazing nation, in just one fell swoop, this, pandemonium comes in and just ruins everything for everyone. And they don't want to get involved because they're not going to legitimize this BS. They're not going to entangle their, people, their military, their fortunes into something that is going to be protracted and complicated and even more messy, especially because you can't anticipate what Trump's going to do from one second to the next. It may be today, hey guys, come help us get these ships through the strait, and then all of a sudden, something happens to one of our allies, military forces there, and then it draws them into the larger war. Like, they don't want that. I mean, but Trump isn't respecting the fact. I mean, he mentioned, to what was it, Starmer, I think is what he was talking, when Starmer's like, I have to, actually talk this over with my advisors, because I can't make a decision based off of what information you're just giving to me. I need to seek counsel, which is what a leader does, is seek counsel. It's why you have, it's why the president has, like a whole cabinet, is to seek counsel. And Trump's like, you don't need to do that. You get to make the decisions on your own. So that just frames for you what Trump thinks is that he's alone in this. He alone decides. He alone can fix it. Remember his little hat that says that, and all of his campaign speeches in 24, that he alone can fix this. It's like, no, he alone can mess things up, and then he expects everybody else to come in to fix it, because now he's put everybody else and their interests on the line. So he's forcing everybody else to do his will, do his bidding, because he's complicated the whole world, and now everybody, in order to fix it, is going to have to step up to the plate and do something about it. And then when what other nations are choosing to do isn't to just fall in line with what Trump wants, because, I mean, personally, I don't think that's the right idea for any nation to step in to do anything about this, especially not at this point in time. Trump needs to simmer in his own shit for a little while, excuse the language, in order to learn a valuable lesson. Our allies would be foolish to trust Trump and to follow him into the dark of his insanity, because this is an insane move. But ultimately, Trump is going to need help, but this gives an opportunity for our NATO allies to do something really strategically important to reaffirm America's place within NATO, and it's deeply embed America into the NATO alliance so that it doesn't come to question again. Like, Trump is trying to throw that in their face to try to suggest we don't need you because look, you're not even there for us. Like, what's this alliance for? This is an opportunity for people to say, Trump, we're here to be here for America. That's what this alliance is about. We've been there for America before. We pledged our lives to help to protect you and defend you. We came to your call and aid when you really needed it. But right now what we're seeing is that you didn't really need to do this. This didn't need to happen. This was completely avoidable. But you chose to do this, and now, you're putting everybody in a position where, like, if we, align with you, we're legitimizing something that, doesn't even conform with international law. And we have to at least abide by that if we're going to say we're, nations of integrity. And so this is an opportunity for NATO to kind of bring America back in to conformities with the NATO alliance to say, this has to be mutually beneficial. And right now, there are many NATO nations that are put in an even more dangerous, precarious position with Trump's attack on Iran, closing down the Strait of Hormuz, creating this, shutdown of the energy, supply chain in the world, and lifting the sanctions of Russia, who is now refilling their war coffers. And then that is going to pose a direct, imminent threat on our NATO allies that are bordering Russia, and make the situation more precarious for Ukraine. And this isn't in the best interest of the world. Russia doesn't have the necessary power ego check that the United States used to provide, because Trump is very much being exploited, used, controlled, manipulated, played, and forced into a control drama in which Putin is in complete control of that. Trump doesn't realize that because he's blinded by his own ego and his own sense of self-importance or whatever, and the fact that he is taking on and assuming the power of the position and the title of POTUS without doing the due diligence of upholding the integrity of that title, and therefore upholding the power of it to be able to influence outcomes in the world. Putin is basically controlling Trump from a distance, and now our NATO allies are in a more precarious situation. Their nations, their lives, their sacred honors, their wealth and treasure is all on the line now. That Putin will be emboldened by this move. Putin already is, to the fact where you can see he's empowering Iran with insights and intelligence, and potentially even more, to help Iran to be able to attack U.S. targets, which is costing American lives and causing damage that otherwise would not have been possible. And so Putin has no allegiance, alliance, to Trump, but does have a connection with Iran and wants to uphold it. And Trump isn't even taking that threat seriously. He refuses to accept, acknowledge, or even respond to it. His ambassadors or representatives or whatever are saying, nah, it's cool, man, we totally will take Russia at their word that they're not doing that, even though there's clearly evidence that suggests that they are. And that poses a real imminent risk, and Trump's not even taking that seriously. And so Trump's not going to be taking it seriously that our NATO allies are now put at risk, where Putin has this opportunity for at least the next month, maybe even longer if this becomes a protracted war, where he's going to get more money in the coffers to be able to have more capacity to prolong his war, and then maybe even do more adventurism to go after other nations which are NATO allies. And then that would draw America in. And I think Trump is looking at it as like he's trying to push away NATO. He's trying to break away from NATO. He's always wanted to do that. This is the time that NATO allies can really draw him back in and say, listen, you know, this mess that you're in with Iran, we can't entangle ourselves in it because it will be weakening us, and we have to prepare ourselves against this new enemy threat that you've, you know, unleashed in power capacities on our side by lifting the sanctions on Russia. So they now have to focus on it. And I think that where they can come in is say, listen, we're about to be all drawn into a much larger world war where Putin comes after NATO allies, and then America's going to be drawn in. And Trump has to decide whether or not he's going to break away from NATO, or he's going to more deeply, you know, embed within it, and then use the full strength of all nations working together, which is why the coalition, why the entire alliance was created. Stronger together sort of thing. And I think that our allies have an opportunity to convince Trump, you know, to come back from the ledge of this self-sabotaging, you know, almost packed suicide that he's had to try to like destroy America from within, doing just stupid things with military adventurism just because he has the power to do it, and bring him back in to say, listen, we have a chance, especially because you're going to have to come to a reasonable conclusion with this. It's going to take a little bit of time. I'm sure there will still be some, you know, fighting or combating with Iran until we can bring this into a settled accord. You're going to need assistance with dealing with the drone problem because America is not equipped enough to deal with that. But man, Ukraine is very good at that. So pitch an alliance with Ukraine to help them with what Zelensky's already, you know, suggested as an offering. Give us, you know, some money and give us some other firepower, and we will help you with drones, which is exactly what you need to counter the drone, you know, issues that you're having in Iran, and to be able to reinforce the strength that, you know, Zelensky now needs to kind of fight back against this empowerment that Trump has given Putin. That can kind of help to settle the score a little bit in that regard, so people can say, see, we can trust you because this isn't about empowering Putin so that he can become a superpower, and then, you know, the superpowers of the world can play imperialism with everybody else, prey on their weaknesses. Rather, instead, you're recommitting to making sure we're protecting all of us, because ultimately Ukraine is about the front line to protect us, to prevent World War III. And it's preventing from our NATO allies to get drug into, you know, more invasion type fighting, with Russia having the capacity to go beyond where they've already gotten into, to keep them in check, and then prevent America from having to be drug into, you know, this larger war. And to give, you know, Trump kind of like the out, in a sense of like reconforming back into international law, in alliance with NATO, and then adhering to that as, you know, the framework by which he can establish legitimacies for what he's doing in Iran. Not necessarily saying that going in was right, but we are finding a way to set things right, if that makes sense. Like, he's never going to be able to make what he did right. History books will always look at it as like the biggest WTF moment in American history, like how unnecessary this was. But, you know, if he chooses, he can turn this into a redeeming moment, because it can again reassert our alliance with NATO, re-strengthen our ties with NATO, help to push back on Putin because as a NATO allied force, to say, you know, we're not going to let you get any farther with Ukraine because we understand what you're trying to do here, and we're not going to let you, you know, try to take over the world because you think you can. You know, we're going to remind you that we can do something about it, and we are going to do something about it. Our interest isn't to come after you, but it's to prevent you from coming after us, and that's the whole point of the NATO alliance. Trump has an ability to reconform us into that, to work in respects with our NATO allies to say, if, as he claims, America's so capable, of handling this on its own, well, you're going to need some drone capacities. Ukraine has that, willing to offer it, already put it out on the table. Let's work together to get that done. And in exchange, Ukraine can get the, backup reinforcements to help to combat the fact that power has been given to Putin in the form of, refilling his financial coffers. And then Trump can willingly submit back into the UN Charter to help to establish legitimacy in the international courts, to help us to send a signal to the rest of the world that, we do really have to recognize there has to be an even playing field of legitimacies that we all submit to willingly, because of the fact that we know that that is the one way in which we can establish the capacity for peaceful accords. It's a place where we can have dialogue, and we can have debate, and we can have, a merit system, and we can have, the corrective mechanisms, and we can have the way to, sanction or incentivize, and we can find ways to form mutual accords and respects and alliances and allegiances and agreements and these sorts of things with one another that helps us to stay our hands, so that we don't get out of hand with our capacity to wield force. We all have the capacity to do that in some form or fashion, but it should be, if anything, the very, very last resort. And if at all possible, just a way to work out reasonable, even if it's small little movements here and there, to get away from aligning with that being, the directive that we go, that we move towards. And so it's a way for us to come to the table, get insights from everybody, everybody in the world, every nation of the world are relevant stakeholders. And the UN provides that platforming for all stakeholders, relevant stakeholders, to come to the table, and not just, we condemn this and we sanction that and we, want to say this isn't right, whatever, but also to have a sense of like a capacity to rein in when people are getting out of hand, and use the collaborative force of the unifying platform of the UN for people to say, kind of to the effect what Iran is capable of doing right now. It controls the Strait of Hormuz and has brought the world to its knees, maybe not like completely bent and bowed, but it's definitely bending, and it's causing tensions, it's causing frictions, it's causing bottlenecks, it's causing constriction, it's limiting our capacity, it is forcing us to, move out of alignment with our normal tendencies. We have to go to contingency plans, we have to reimagine things that we've done. It's disrupting everybody's lives, and so everybody's relevant stakeholders in that. Everybody should have a seat at the table to say, this is how it's impacting us. This is the support we need to just get through this issue, handle it while it's still an issue. And then a way that we see can get us back into accord with, some sense of normalcy. But hopefully, which would be the ideal, is to channel us into a new direction that says, let's not make ourselves this, weak, vulnerable ever again. This is how we shore up those weaknesses. We can move together and form new partnerships of reinforcing the resilience to be able to get through anything, including this type of, mishap. And Trump submitting to the law of the international law and the UN Charter, submitting to, our alliances and our agreements with NATO, and, working with our NATO allies to reconfirm our relationship with them and work towards helping to bolster their strengths and capacities, and in return rebuild our trust, so that once America can kind of get the issue of Iran more, condensed down to something that is more reasonable that other people could involve with, then we can step in with doing something a little bit more than what we did before in terms of, just the nuclear deal that Obama had signed, because clearly it wasn't enough to prevent Iran from continuing to pursue its advance to, entrench its powers, so it has the capacity to be, this, force to be able to be a game player on the board, essentially. They're able to make moves and it affects people, and we would want to lessen their capacity to make negative outcomes for everyone. And that's only going to be possible if we can get back into, preventing them from, seeking nuclear capacities, and then work with them to try to get them out of alignment with Putin, because they're reinforcing each other's negative powers, and it's making the world, more dangerous because of that. And, if they could just be separated, they're less able to feed off each other's negativity. And then hopefully some cooler heads can prevail with relating to them, in ways that distinguish a separation between those negative forces, and lean them in towards hopefully redeeming the time for themselves and moving away from being such bad actors in the world, so that the world can come back into, conforms with them in a peaceful accord. It's like the ultimate goal and ideal, for any relationship with any nation. But we need to make sure that powers of bad actors don't concentrate, that we can, keep them separated, and that could be part of our negotiation with Iran, and give them the offering of a way to no longer consider America as being this threat and this, dangerous thing, or this thing that, that they feel, anonymity towards, and these sorts of things. I don't think that part necessarily is going to be possible while Trump is still in office, because he's such a combative, aggressive, bullying, mean, cruel, indifferent person, that, his whole thing where he said sometimes you just got to let him fight it out, unless that was his response to Ukraine and Putin, and why he said he was going to settle all of that in a day, and that war's still going on. Sometimes you just got to let the kids fight, and just let them fight it out for a little while or whatever, and what are you going to do? And that's not, of course, the right answer, but you can see that that's where his mind is with things. He doesn't really think about the consequences. He just thinks that, these things happen, and, the world is dog eat dog, mighty crush the weak, and that's just the way it is. And the whole point is to get to, the top of the mountain so that you can beat everybody else down. And that's not true. That may be the world that he's thinking from. That's the paradigm he's thinking from. That's how he's acting. Those are the truths that he believes in and operates off of. When he takes in his perspective, his perception, and his propositions all come from that place of thinking that the world is dog eat dog, mighty crush the weak, free for all hellscape. And so you're probably not going to change that about him, but you can play on the notions that he cares about. He cares about his image, he cares about his brand, he cares about his money, he cares about, helping the, give out token rewards to people, so that they will glorify him in the ways that inflates his ego or whatever. And he likes being able to have the capacity to give favors to people and, increase their fortunes, and, because he knows that then they kind of are on the hook and owe him, and then he can call on that. He likes thinking he's the important person that everybody turns to, even though it's kind of like people are exploiting you because, you're so easy to win over. But Trump plays on those notions. That's entirely what he's about. It's all about egotism to him. And so you can play on those notions of sympathizing with this very weak position that he's in terms of like his ego rules all for him, and not, feed into it, but rather like respect that that's where he's coming from, and give him something that's a little bit better than an ego, trying to check his ego or to attack his ego or, to stroke his ego. You're not doing any of those things. You're rather putting him in a position of recognizing he has responsibilities and he has duties, and he took on this job and he has to do his job. And if he doesn't do his job, there's going to be consequences. But if he does his job, then there's no reason for us to recourse him, right? No reason to bring in corrective mechanisms. And he's already done a lot of things that are against the law. He's already broken the law. He's violated law. He's ignored the law. And so, he's in a precarious situation, especially coming in the midterms. His party's not doing a good job of selling everybody that, he can be trusted to make decisions on behalf of the American people, or America as a nation. And so there's going to be a lot of people that are going to want to vote in people who are going to put a check on that, maybe even potentially remove him from office, and start going after other people in his cabinet who are not doing their responsibilities and duties because they are instead just proving their allegiance to Trump. And so everybody's going to be in a very bad position, and once the capacity of the rule of the law catches up to them. But again, they have a redeeming opportunity here, in a sense of they can, it's always the right time to do what is right. And they can submit to the law and be willing to set things right and do right by the American people and work together with our allies so that they will come to our aid in the position where we are going to need it, more so than we need it right now. The other thing about it is, I know that that's a long shot for Trump to submit to the law because he doesn't respect it right now, but I do think that the right voice speaking with him could help to bring it to the light as if you want to respect and honor your legacy, this is the right thing to do. If you want to protect your interests, your family interests, your buddies and your a little elite buddies, whatever interests, if you want to not have to face the consequences of failing all of those people that you made promises to enrich them or whatever, and you're not going to be able to follow through on that, and those are people that can hurt you. I know you don't care about the average American citizen because they can do nothing. You can't be touched by them. It's not like they give you money, they don't care, he doesn't care if they give him money or not. He has people that give him millions of dollars, so he doesn't care about having, favors, and he doesn't care about having fans. He just wants to be the important person and feel like he's important and special. All of those things could go away in an instant, and he can end up turning into a liability for all of those people. And he's going to be put in a corner with that concept the more that his power to exploit power or abuse power as POTUS is going to come to a head, in terms of we're going to start holding you accountable for these decision making. And so now he's a liability to all those other people. And then that turns him into a threat risk that they are going to have to assess. And they're going to start making moves in their power positions that are not going to necessarily be favorable for him. And so he's put himself in a very, very dangerous situation. And he needs an out, I think. And the best way to do that is to, use the shield of the force of good in the United States and the world, and that is to willingly submit to law. And in that way, he can say, it's beyond my capacity or control to, change this outcome. I have to submit back into law. It reconfirms our institutions. It reconfirms for, everybody that, the government itself is not a person, but it's an entire system, an entire network, an entire channeling of intelligence and insights and wisdoms and knowledge and know-how and capabilities and infrastructures and establishments and, all of these things that people just happen to know how to work the inner workings of to make it all function. And so, it's one of my favorite sayings, presidents come and go, but it's our nation, our constitution, our constitutional republic, in our democracy, that will be forever, as long as we can keep it, right? And kind of get Trump into a, kind of relenting with his need to exploit those powers and willingly submit to the conformities of the Constitution that says he's not the one that has the powers to do war. And then people will start to say, okay, well, the system is working like it's supposed to. We can trust in our systems again. We can trust in our elections again. And then we can vote in people who are going to start to say, look at Trump not as whatever you say, Commander-in-Chief, whatever you say, King Trump, instead saying, like, whatever you say has to conform to the Constitution, and it's our job to put a check on that if it goes astray from that. But as long as you can conform with that, there's a lot of good stuff that we can do together. Functional democracy, right? And it gives Trump a way to, bring forth some new moves that we can make in America to help to shift things to improve the American situation, where he might actually be able to follow through on some of the promises that he made on the campaign in terms of making life in America more affordable, and to improve, life for Americans and whatnot. That's not going to be a quick and easy fix. It's not going to be anything anytime soon. It's going to be something he's going to have to call on the American people to be a part of fixing the brokenness of the system, and people are going to have to get involved. I don't know whether he has enough capacity to rally the masses around that idea, but I do believe, like I was saying in my last video, Trump is going to have to pass this baton over to somebody. And I think if he can find the right person that will be able to take that up, that isn't going to take it in this extreme right run, or that they're going to have to fight some extreme left person trying to pull it away from him or whatever, but rather find something that is in mutual accords with everyone, who can take that forward and be there to be a complement to Trump's chaos and to establish order within it. That will help Trump to kind of like save face, as, man, he could have been a way worse president. Things could have been way worse, but luckily he was able to be moderated by the right influence to calm him down in the final years of his final term. And he passed off the baton of responsibilities and duties and what we were working on together to set things straight, and then pass that on in such a way that actually unifies us, brings together the people in MAGA who are being disenchanted right now by the fact that Trump really wasn't capable as he led on to be, and that he made a lot of false promises intentionally, and he really worked to deceive people to kind of cover up his mistakes. But they can be led to a point where that's okay, that, we all make mistakes in terms of, like, we voted for him and we shouldn't have misplaced trust in him. We all make mistakes. It's okay. But moving forward, we're going to redeem ourselves, because we've decided that had we not been given that insight of, like, really how fragile our democracy is, how fragile our republic is, we probably wouldn't have been able to come to terms that we really all are in this together and have to start making decisions together, where we're not infighting about, political factioning, but really find a way to be a functional democracy, and to do so in a more direct way. And in such a way where it's not like a get you gotcha moment for any, placement on the political spectrum. It's not about going after Trump and just, like, completely destroying him and everything that he created, but rather being able to say, this is what a Trump, presidency did for America, did to America. Now we need somebody that will come in and do for America what's necessary to set things right. And that right person could help Trump in the final, approach of his, leaving office, to make it so that it kind of like buffers and kind of polishes and kind of like smooths some of the edges of the roughness that he's created, to make it be like, yeah, this wasn't great, but it could have been worse, and we're glad that it finally got a handle before it got out of hand to the point where it was, irredeemably, screwed. Everybody's irredeemably screwed. So I think there's an opportunity for that. I think that, especially if you're approaching it in terms of Trump, this is your legacy, not just like, as president, but your legacy as a person on this planet. You can either go out in a blaze of, self-aggrandized, selfishness, and deviant glory, or you can, give yourself in service in a way that, you never were able to do in any other part of your life. But now, coming to the end of your life, and you find yourself in the most powerful position in the entire world, and you have the capacity to make a difference in the lives of so many people, not just in America, but in the entire world. And, what you choose is important. How you choose to act is going to make a profound difference for the trajectory of our nation and our world, for decades to come, maybe even longer, and that depending, and it's all up to you. It's in your hands of deciding, how you're going to lead us forward into destruction and chaos and mayhem and separation and, violence and violating people and violating nations and sovereignty, setting the tone for more chaos and disorder and mayhem and violence and cruelty and exploitation and extractivism and all these things. Not to mention the complexities of, climate change ruining, our options and limiting our options and narrowing our world and complicating everything. You can make a positive decision to relinquish control over trying to make the world conform to what you hoped it would be. Realize you didn't really have the capacity to do that, even with all the powers that be in the role of POTUS, because there was no way to convince everybody to go along with such a scheme that actually works out of the interest of our allies, of the larger global world, and the American people and people from all nations. Nobody was going to ever follow him into this self-destruct mode, essentially. But he could stop and he could pivot and he can diverge and he can start aligning with a path that has vision that says, there's a way to make it so that it's not so bad that this happened. Silver lining, this, happened for a reason. And that reason is what we define it's going to be in terms of how we move forward. And I think the best way to move forward with this would be able to say, now we understand, how things can get out of hand. We understand where we need checks and balances, where we need corrective mechanisms. Let's install those. And let's willingly submit to them. Let's reconfirm our oath and our pledge to our Constitution and submit to law and be willing to work to reconfirm that and to establish it as, yes, this is, important and in the best interest of all parties involved. And hopefully from this, get us to a point where we can look at this as, a way for us to finally see the light in terms of what truly matters to us, and find a way to realign with that which is going to get us to where we actually want to go, and a way for us to all together focus on the good so that the good can get better, and accept the fact that you can't be great if you fail to do good. And if we can just change that narrative in the Make America Great sort of thing to, making America great is about doing good. And with that,